my friends, and welcome back to Play or Display. Whew. We have a lot to talk about because we previously did a PODguy podcast ranking every single segment in what was initially 5 of the very awesome, 4 out of 5 being very awesome VHS movies. That was done some time ago. For those of you who have not seen that, I definitely recommend you check that out first. The real difference between that one and the one that we're doing here, firstly, is the fact that I went into each segment, went through the story a little bit more deeply for each segment, and the point system that I'm working with might be a little bit different here. And the second thing is, and the main reason why we're doing this today, is because there is now a 6th installment to the VHS franchise, being VHS 85. And it's weird, like, I didn't even know they were going to do a sixth one, and before that I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if they did a VHS movie in 1980s, somewhere in there? And lo and behold, they were already doing it. So, the stars aligned, the movie happened, and before we get into this ranking, let's just go ahead and do kind of a spoiler-free chat about 1985. VHS 85, rather. I overall really liked it. I watched it with a friend of mine who I have recently initiated into the VHS franchise. She kind of just waved it off as kind of just a generic, schlocky, found footage franchise. And then I started showing her the films. I actually started with 99, because that's my personal favorite of the films. And she really got hooked on it. So she visited, and we were like, holy crap, the day after you arrive, 85 is going to be available on Shudder. We should check it out. So we watched it, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't think it was a perfect movie. Like, I'm looking at the different reviews that have been online thus far. As of recording, the movie is not even a week old yet, at least in the public eye. So it's still pretty brand new, but it seems like people either really, really love it or really, really hate it. For me, it's kind of, I'd say high middle is where I would place it, but overall, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it did a lot of innovative stuff, tried a lot of new things, while also doing a lot of things that were very traditional to the VHS franchise. I think we all very much missed. Sorry if you hear any background noise in the background. For the record, I'm taking care of my parents' rabbits, and they're very hungry and thirsty today, so if anything happens, then we'll just truck through it. But anyways, all that being said, I had gone ahead and I ranked every single videotape and every single framework in the VHS franchise, all 6 movies. This is excluding anything that was left on the cutting room floor. Like, for example, I know there was another segment for VHS Viral that was not incorporated into the movie. You probably hear a little rattling noise. That's a rabbit drinking some water right now. But we're not going to include any deleted content, anything that was left out. We're just going to be focusing on the quote-unquote theatrically or home-released copies of these films that we have come to know and love, or hate, depending on where you stand. But that's another difference between this podcast and the one we did before. Before, we kind of ranked the frameworks outside of the segments and just focused on the segments, but this time, I think it's okay that we combine them all, because even though overall I find the frameworks to be a little lackluster, even though they are the glue for all the segments that we see in each movie, they do ultimately stand as their own story. Now, whether or not are those stories very good or not is to be explained very, very soon in this ranking, but they will be ranked with the same point system. And speaking of point system, let me first explain that, and then finally I'll give you the ranking that you are here for and will hopefully enjoy. So I rank them, all the segments and all the frameworks, on a scale from 1 to 5. So basically, 1 is one-pointer segments are, I do not like them, I in fact might hate them, or I just feel very uncomfortable with them, and not that I get squeamish or anything like that. I'm totally fine with gore overall. Maybe I just really didn't like the story, or I found the directing to be very shoddy, or they just didn't feel very VHS. They didn't really contribute to the legacy of the franchise in any way. So anything in the 0.1 range, I just didn't really give a hoot for. Then as for the ones with 2 points, they're fine. They're kind of just there. They're floaters. They're alright. But I couldn't bring myself to say that I straight up disliked them or hated them. They're kind of just filler. They're there. Maybe for some other people, they could say that they're some of their favorites, or maybe they're lukewarm bubblegum favorites of theirs. So they're okay. They're all right, but I just couldn't see myself putting them any much higher than that. As for the 3-pointers, those are the ones that are okay. They're good. I actually really enjoy them, but I, of course, do have some bigger favorites that are a little bit higher. For 4-pointers, those are ones that I really do love. I thoroughly enjoy them. This is where a lot of the ones that define the franchise are, but as for the 5-point rankings, those are the ones that are my personal absolute favorites. Like, if there are any that I would recommend someone to watch, for the most part, these are going to be the ones that are first going to come to mind. Like, if anyone asks, like, hey, there's so many VHS segments, which would you suggest are the ones I start with? I'd say, here are some ones that I think are very seminal to the franchise. Then here are some which are not necessarily very important to them, but I just happen to really seriously love them. So that's where it is there. And the 4-pointers and 5-pointers, take that with a grain of salt. There are some in the 4-point range which I think should objectively be in the 5-point range. And that's another last thing that I wanted to describe. This is a subjective list. This is just on a horror fan's preference. This is just how I like them. I find objective lists to be very boring. They're kind of redundant, especially when you view them across many people's lists. I don't think there's enough subjective lists. I think those are a very important way of getting people's unfiltered just their thoughts on the different segments and why it is they value them. I think that's very important. So, and also I think I might be the very first person who's coming out with a full ranking of all segments from all current 6 movies. So, I don't know if I am or not, correct me if I'm wrong there. I might be totally wrong, but from what I've seen, I haven't seen many other reviews just culminating all of them together. I've seen VHS 85 twice now, to be thorough. I actually just watched it today to be sure I was avoiding recency bias, and that definitely changed up where I'd rank everything. So, speaking of ranking, let's finally get into this shit. So, hold on, let me take a sip of water firstly, before I get into our 1-pointers, because wow, they are bad. I do not like these ones at all, so hold on a moment. Okay, so the first 2 we're going to talk about, these are the ones that for me are just inexcusable. I can't even see anyone having them as like a guilty pleasure despite their piss poor quality. I just think there's no redemption for them at all, these last 2, both 1-pointers. Spot 31, we have Vicious Circles from VHS Viral. This is the framework. You could barely even call it a framework. It is so mind-bogglingly scattered. Viral is, if it's not already apparent, it's my least favorite of the 6, bar none. I just really do not like that movie, and most are in agreement with that. If you take the segments and look at them individually, they might be better, and they might even be better off in other films in the franchise, but overall, just in this collection of films, they're just not good. There's no real gel to them, and that's further broken apart by Vicious Circles being the framework. And to this day, I still don't understand what it's trying to do. I guess in the original trilogy, if you'll call it that, like the pre-Shudder VHS films, they're trying to give you this idea of the reason why any of these VHS tapes exist at all is because I guess there's sort of this invisible cult that's trying to put these VHS tapes together, and when viewed in a certain order, it corrupts the viewer, and it gives them immortality or some sort of supernatural power or something like that. I mean, that's my crackpot theory. But of those 3 frameworks in those 3 movies, Vicious Circles, I guess the title's correct, just because it is so antagonistically nonsensical. I just don't understand anything that it's trying to do. It's just chaos on the streets. It's hopping from one segment to the next. The thing about frameworks, the reason why I'm so cynical about them is because they have such an important job with linking together all the segments, and this one just fails to do it. And then I guess there's this guy at the end of it, and then he encounters some chick who's on the monitor inside of the back of a van, and she says, I'm going to take all these segments, I'm going to release them to the public, and everyone's going to be messed up. It, like, reminds me of one of the endings of one of the, like, the spin-off Ring sequels, if you know what I'm talking about. Like, there it kind of sort of works, but here it doesn't work for me at all. There's just no flavor in Vicious Circles. It's tasteless, it's, needlessly violent, and I hate saying that with horror because I love watching violence take place, don't get me wrong, but it was violence without meaning. I didn't feel like it lent to the story. I don't think it was exciting or fun or interesting. All the chaos that was happening just to happen, and it was boring because of that, and I didn't like that. So that's really all I have to say. Like, again, I watched the movie 3 times, and there's nothing I can remember that's worth toting about at this point. It's just empty. Really, there's just nothing there. Just a lot of blind chaos. Blind chaos, that's the best way I could describe it. Moving on to segment 30, and I'm going to try moving through the rest of these a little bit faster because, again, we've talked about most of these already in the previous podcast. We'll just go into depth when it comes to my least favorites, my most favorites, and obviously anything from VHS 85. But anyways, in the 30th spot, we have Bone Storm, and this is by far my least favorite of all the segments, if you put the frameworks aside. This is a skateboarding one where you have all the zombies kind of come back to life in that skateboarding arena. Fun idea, I just felt like the execution was very terrible, and almost as terrible as the acting. I think the acting was very piss poor. The kids that you had in the skating rink, I feel like, I said this before, if you close your eyes and you listen to all their voices, you would not be able to tell who is who. They were all just carbon copies of each other, and this carbon copy was not great. You just didn't really care about any of the characters. You weren't invested in any of them. You didn't really love to hate any of them. They're kind of just there. So, yeah, it was just a very tonally bland start, and really the only thing I liked about it is the idea of them whacking out all the cultists, then they came back. That was kind of fun, and then they kind of just run away, some make it, some don't, and it's just, yeah, I just didn't like Bone Storm at all. And the last thing I'll mention, I mentioned this before, the really shitty camera work. Like, I get it, it's VHS franchise, it's found footage, it's from POV, and especially since they're on a skateboard, then yeah, it's gonna be all over the place, but it was almost nauseating, like, more so than Cloverfield. And Cloverfield I'm actually good with, I actually really like Cloverfield, but this one was just too much. It was unwatchable. I mean, that's really what makes for a one-pointer, if it's unwatchable for me. Speaking of unwatchable, that takes us to spot 29 with Terror from VHS 94. So 94, it's an interesting movie for me because I love watching it up to the very end of the subject. Then I can just turn the movie off because I don't like the framework and I don't like Terror. This, for me, it was just a lukewarm remake of The Thing, which is obviously one of the greatest horror remakes of all time, let alone one of the greatest remakes of all time, and I just felt like it was too derivative. It was very predictable, I felt like. The visual effects are cool, but it's been done better and with no CGI at all. So, I mean, that's another thing that notches a lot of these segments down, is if they're trying to harken back to a far superior predecessor, in this case being The Thing, and they just don't do enough to one-up that formula. And Terror, for me, it was nothing more than a downgrade, and I really hated that siren that they kept repeating. Like, it was seminal to the plot of the story, I get it. Like, that's when they have to go back into that encampment and then shoot that alien that was kind of manifesting as a human, and then you're wondering why. Like, I like that mystery aspect too, but there's just too many little things about it that just annoyed me a lot. So yeah, I just don't like Terror at all, so that gets 1 point for me. Number 28, this is one that I hate. I wish I liked this one a lot more because it has such a good idea behind it, and this is from VHS 2, and it's ultimately the one that sinks the movie for me in certain spots. This is Phase 1 clinical trials. This is the one where you got the guy, he was in a car accident, he gets a replacement cybernetic eye, and that allows him to see paranormal apparitions, which is such a great idea. I love that a lot. I think that would be a great video game premise, even. That's something I said to my friend as we were watching these VHS movies. And it's such a great startup. I think it has such a good preface, but as soon as Ghost Uncle shows up, as soon as that chick walks in, I think that's immediately where the entire thing just sinks, and I'm no longer invested. It just loses me from there on out. It no longer cares about suspense. It just works at a breakneck pace to get to the ending, and the ending is not satisfying at all. There's no catharsis of any sort. It just ends with the ghost feeding the eyeball to the guy, kind of, and it just ends there. You don't really get any kind of answers. There's no sort of enticing ambiguity, and as I've said before, ambiguity is what makes a lot of these segments great. But in this one, it just gives you this concrete, here it is ending that just isn't satisfying at all. And yeah, I just really wish I was head over heels for it, but ultimately it just leaves me the most disappointed of all the segments, so that's why it's all the way down here. Moving on to spot 27, we have Holy Hell. This is another framework. This is the framework for VHS 94. You get a whole bunch of SWAT members kind of just dropping into this encampment of some sort. They're walking around, there's all these monitors, these dead bodies, and on these monitors are seeing the tapes from the film. It's probably does, I'll give it props, it probably does the best job at giving tangibility to the premise of having all these videotapes relate to each other, but it just didn't do a very good job for me. And I forgot to mention, this is the first two-parter. I don't hate this one. It's just kind of there, like, it just exists to be glue for the movie, but I just don't feel anything from it. It's not exciting. I don't think the end is very good. It ends similarly to Vicious Circles, where you have someone saying, I'm gonna release the videos to the world, you know, and just get that cheesy, like, one-dimensional villain angle, you know, I'm gonna ruin everything, whatever. And yeah, it's just, there's not a whole lot to explain. They, like, the SWAT team members, they get picked off one by one as the tapes are playing. You don't really know how. And at the end, you get just this one guy being executed by these two chicks. And that's kind of all. And it was just kind of lame for me. And then that's how 94 ends. And again, after the subject, we reach Terror and the end of Holy Hell. And then I just don't care at that point. So that's why 94 is such a split movie for me. But anyways, there's nothing really else to discuss about Holy Hell. It kind of just is what it is. It's not really trying to do anything other than gel the movies together. And it barely does that with gelling the tapes together, but there it is there. In spot 26, we have another segment from Viral. We're going to be saying Viral a lot in the coming minutes, but we have Dante the Great. I've cut this one a little bit of slack. Again, I'm giving this one 2 points. It's not bad, is the thing. I just feel like it's trapped in a movie, which is otherwise pretty terrible. I think it's an interesting enough premise where it could have its own movie. I think I've said that before. Like, you have a magician, he gets Harry Houdini's heralded cloak. Well, it's fictionalized, I don't think it ever really existed, but it's so overpowering that Houdini himself did not want to use it, and Dante gets a hold of it, then he basically gets corrupted by its power. I think that's a very fun and interesting idea, and I think that functions well from a found footage perspective. But the issue for me is, of all the segments in the franchise, this one feels the least VHS of them all. There's no grit to it. It doesn't have that film grain. I mean, just a filter shouldn't be enough for me to write off a segment. I don't think that's enough by any capacity. But, I don't know, just the way that it portrays itself as this documentary style, and everyone's like saying, who knows what really happened behind the Dante mystery and all that, and then you're seeing through the exact same documentary format exactly what happened. So the direction just doesn't make any sense, and that's where it really loses me there. Yeah, and it doesn't have any respect for that ambiguous aspect that I think really sells most of these segments. So, yeah, Dante the Great, for me, it's stupid to say, I know, it isn't that great. I think it could have been a lot better if it was its own standalone movie, or was maybe just in one of the other VHS movies. Maybe if it was plugged into 94 in place of Terror or something, I might like it a lot more. But really, Dante the Great, it just doesn't work for me personally. Now, moving on to our very first entry from 1985, in our 25th spot, so in the 2-point range, we have TKNOGD. That's how it's spelt, but it means Techno God. This one's weird. I guess it's a so bad it's good for me, personally. Everyone definitely chuckles whenever they mention this, whether they liked it or not. It's just a very odd one. So again, it's one of the newer ones, so we'll go ahead and talk about the premise a little bit more deeply. You have this anonymous woman kind of doing some performance art. It's very awkward. It's like deadpan, 60 seconds of silence. She's kind of just standing there in front of the audience. No one's really saying anything or muttering anything. Then she just blurts out, "Who here believes in God?" And then that's a part of the film where me and my friend just started cracking up. Like, it just lost all credibility. The rest of the segment was just a laugh fest. Like, there was no immersion anymore. We just totally lost our minds at it. And then from there on out, this woman on stage, digressing, she kind of just goes on this rant of how technology's taken over. Then she has this virtual reality headset, which makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't think they had any semblance or even idea of what VR would have been in the 80s. So, I mean, I guess maybe with movies like Total Recall, they kind of had an idea of that. But then the fact that they literally just called the headset an iPhone, I think it, like, this is... Alright, here's another critique that I could have with some of these segments. I don't like when a segment is too heavy-handed. I think Techno God was way too heavy-handed, and I guess that was kind of the point, where you have this performance artist being very loud and proud about hating on technology, but then again, she hates on technology by using the technology, and then she confronts the tech god within the virtual reality, and she's ultimately pulled apart, and then her headsets are moved by one of the audience members, everyone applauds, and then her head looks like something that came out of Five Nights at Freddy's, pretty much. And honestly, that's my favorite part of the whole segment, and then it just ends there. But yeah, I just don't feel like there's any takeaway from it. The visual effects are kind of cool, but I think for me, the thing that irks me the most is the VR thing. Like, I just don't feel like it fits into the grittiness of the 80s. And I guess, again, like with Total Recall, VR is not something that was totally not in the mindset of people from the 80s. Like, it was just too accurate to how we understand it now. So for me, it chronologically just doesn't add up. It doesn't work for me. So, Techno God, definitely my least favorite part of 85. I could definitely see people liking it more than me, but for me, it just wasn't there. I did not prefer it. Spot 24, I'm going to be a little quick about this one. It's also from Viral. We have Parallel Monsters, where you got this guy, creates a portal, he goes into an alternate dimension where everything's parallel to everything he understands, except Satanism has won, pretty much. And you know what? I pretty much dislike this one for the same reason why I dislike Techno God. I feel like it's too heavy-handed on its messaging, on its imagery, and for that reason, it kind of robs the viewer of piecing things together for themselves. I feel like it takes away that trust element, like trusting us to understand what's happening, but instead it has this very blatant, like, satanic antichrist imagery, and at a certain point we're like, okay, we get it, we understand this, and we kind of just get a little tired of it. At least I did. So I just got a little bored of it, and it kind of just, and it's a fine segment. It's okay if it's done on its own, alright. But even then, I don't think I would enjoy it very much, so that's pretty much it there. Spot 23, From VHS 2, we have Slumber Party Alien Abduction. Now, I think there's a lot of people who enjoy this one a lot more than me, but personally, I think it just moves at a breakneck pace at a certain point. Setup is fine. I mean, you kind of just get to know all these kids. I think there's too many of them. I mean, I guess the benefit of having all these kids is to make it more intimidating when the aliens do start pulling them out of the movie one by one. Then you do become a little bit more worried for the main three, being the older sister, the younger brother, and then the dog Tank, who I don't know why, I was mistakenly calling him Tugboat in the initial podcast. I don't know whose ass I yanked that out of, but Tugboat, that's a good name for a dog. I like that. I'm gonna use that one day. But, yeah, again, it just moved way too fast for me. The alien design, at least per my friend, when she watched it, she found that the aliens were very goofy looking, and after rewatching, I was like, yeah, they could have done something a little more innovative. I mean, they're definitely creepy. I think the movements were the best part of them. They were very shambly and weird, so that was good, but yeah, overall, I just didn't like the segment a whole ton. Moving on to segment 22, or spot 22, we have the Gawkers from 1999, or VHS 99. Now, this is a unique case because this is also a framework, firstly, so it is a framework which then leads into one of the main segments. And also, of all the segments that we reviewed in the last PODguy PODcast, where we talked about the VHS segments, I think this is the one that moved the most. This was a lot higher on the list, I think. Not dramatically, but it was definitely higher. But then it definitely moved down. So I think before, maybe it had, like, a high 3-point ranking, but now it's a high 2. And I think that's because, I think 99, that's the one I rewatched the most. I think it's just the most rewatchable of all of them, at least for me. But every time I rewatch the Gawkers, I just become less and less interested. I just become more bored of the same old thing. It's got the group of kids, well, gawking at the lady and all that. And it's kind of just a slog before we do get to the climax where the woman that they're watching happens to be a Gorgon. And I think that part's really fun, but it just takes too long to get there. So, yeah, it's just kind of a trudge through a lot of muck in order to get there. Sorry, notifications, please ignore that. To our next 2-pointer, that's nothing important. Okay, just checking my notifications, all good. This is our last 2-pointer, actually, and our 21st spot. This is from 1985, once again. This is God of Death. Now, this one I'm kind of split on. I understand why people really like this one. It's very reminiscent of Wreck, one of the all-timers in the found footage genre. I definitely see that. And that's one of the reasons why I love half of it. It starts off with just this 1985, obviously, hence the title of the damn movie, news footage. You just have people doing their usual rounds. You got someone in the news booth, you got someone on the street. They're preparing to kind of just report on the daily news, on the weather and whatever. And an earthquake happens, and honestly, on first viewing, I thought this was excellent. I thought this was a very terrifying setup. If they would have just did the earthquake and then had these people in this very claustrophobic environment of this collapsed building, I think that would have been great if they just had the earthquake and that was all. Like, I was really immersed with just that. But then again, I have to remind myself, this is VHS we're talking about. It's not meant to always just be wholly realistic. Eventually, you do get a supernatural edge to it. So, they eventually encounter, like, they're falling deeper and deeper underground. And then they discover these ancient ruins. I don't know if they're Mayan or Aztec or what, but they're some sort of, it's like an ancient doorway or something. And the closer they get to it, certain members of the crew start to get possessed. They start attacking each other, disemboweling each other, and one of them takes out the heart of another, Indiana Jones style, and presents it to this, well, god of death. And then everything on the ground above, no one's totally aware of the supernatural insanity that's happening underground. So, yeah, this one's a little tough for me. It's not bad. It's not a bad segment by any means. I just feel like the first half is much stronger. I just felt like it was a lot more scary for me, because it was so grounded. But once you get into the supernatural stuff in the second half, it just wasn't nearly as intimidating. I feel like it kind of pulled me out of it a bit. So yeah, that's kind of where it lost me, but by no means is it a bad segment. I think from here on out, the segments are pretty good, and that is why God of Death is the last 2-point segment that we have to talk about. From here on up, I think everything is, at the very least, solid or does what it needs to do. So that takes us into our 20th spot, and before we do that, I need a little bit of water. Because you know me, if you are familiar with this channel, again, this is an action figure review channel, but as for the PODguy PODcast, if I'm talking for a long amount of time, I need a lot of water, so you gotta forgive me on that. But anyway, so we move on to the top 20. From VHS 1, we have Tape 56. This is the framework. I'll admit, I do have some mixed feelings on it. This is the very first time where we have a framework. I mean, it's the first VHS movie, therefore, the very first time where we need something to link the VHS tapes together. This one is not the strongest framework. There are two more that I think are better than this. So, of course, it follows these guys doing these snuff sexploitation films, which are very disturbing to watch, and rightfully so. This is early VHS. VHS 1 is definitely the most gritty of all of them. And I wouldn't say that I love Tape 56, but I will admit, I've been a fan of the VHS franchise for a year and a half, roughly, and Tape 56, despite me finding it distasteful, it's, in a weird way, kind of nostalgic. Like this is our first memory of this franchise. This is the first thing that we remember, the first thing that we see when we start watching these movies, and it kind of reminds us of the tone, the grittiness, the uncensored nature that these films are supposed to take, and yeah, just the foundation that it lays for everything that we've seen after that. So yeah, I give it some props for that, but on its own, it's okay. Like, I do remember showing my friend this movie for the first time, and she was really interested in that guy who was, like, quote-unquote dead, sitting on that chair, and then sometimes he's there, sometimes he's not, as the tapes cycle in and out, and that was definitely an intimidating thing going on. We didn't really know why he was getting up, sitting down, no one was really noticing it, part of that crew, but in the end, I think it was too much ambiguity. We didn't totally know what was going on, and we don't want to know what's totally going on. Again, that ambiguity is what keeps us interested, but ultimately, I think there's two more frameworks that just do a better job than this one. So, moving on to spot 19, we have the longest title of all of them, being The Sick Thing That Happened to Emily When She Was Younger from VHS 1. Not a bad segment. It's actually pretty okay, but I just get a little bit weirded out by this one, because I don't know if it's trying to be supernatural, is it trying to be sci-fi, is it trying to be culty? I think, like, using the Skype/Zoom setup is very good. I'm actually kind of surprised that none of the segments have tried to do that since then, because it is such a good idea. It reminds me a lot of Unfriended, which I think is one of the hidden gems within the found footage genre. I think it's such a good movie. Definitely check that out if you haven't. But The Sick Thing, as I call it, shorthand because it's such a damn long title, I think it tries doing too much with the short time that it has. Again, it tries tackling too many genres to the point where I don't, like, me as a viewer, when I'm tangoing with this ambiguity, I can't quite find a resolution for myself that's satisfying. I can't create my own crackpot theory that is satisfying to me. So yeah, it just doesn't quite gel, doesn't quite work, but other than that, it's still interesting to watch. I think the parts are greater than the whole. I do like the supernatural elements, I do like the sci-fi elements, if you can even call it sci-fi with a fetus or whatever the hell was going on. I mean, I guess he said, is this thing supposed to be human? And then I guess that kind of, at least for me, is what made me infer, oh, it's aliens. But I could be totally wrong. It could just be like a mutant baby or something. I really don't know. But that's pretty much it there. Spot 18, we have what I just call Halloween, 10/31/98 from VHS 1. This is one of the ones that a lot of people call to be their absolute favorite, and honestly, I would never take that away from them. It's one where you have a whole bunch of guys, they get the wrong address to a Halloween party, they walk into an almost abandoned house, they go into the attic, they find a whole bunch of cultists or religious fanatics, we're not sure who they are at first, and they got this woman crucified. The guys free the woman who's crucified, they bring her out, and then it turns out she's possessed by some horrible demon. She traps them in a locked car on a railway, they get hit by a train, and then that's where the film ends. This whole thing is actually great. I really do not dislike any aspect of this segment. I think it's fantastic. And one of my favorite parts about it, and this is a total tangent, is how it leads into the end credits of this movie, and then it goes into a really awesome track. They Come to Get Us from the Death Set, who contribute the end tracks for VHS 1 and 2, so for me, they're like the VHS band, kind of, and that also helps with their punk rock aesthetic to sort of influence the way that I view the legacy of early VHS, if you know what I mean. So that for me is also part of 10/31/98. The end credits also add to the ending of the segment and the movie in turn. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, especially that second half where you have all the CGI elements. You got the arms coming out of the wall, you got the door start to close in on itself, that little window. Actually, my friend noticed it. I didn't even notice that before for some reason. But yeah, just a lot of fun little CGI cheesy gimmicks, which I found really fun. Like, for others, I could see the CGI taking them out of the moment, but for me, I just found it very fun and hokey and campy. It was great. It was a good time. So I really come to like 10/31/98, but obviously there's ones I just like a little bit more. Speaking of Death Set, keep that in mind as we move into Spot 17. From VHS 2 now, we have our second to last framework to discuss, being Tape 49. I know some of these have weird titles, but this is the one where we have two, I don't know if they're like journalists or agents, but they're a couple at least. They go into an abandoned house. That's kind of a familiar theme throughout these segments. They find a whole bunch of tapes. The woman of the couple, she sits down with the tapes, and with each tape she becomes a lot more tired, she gets a bloody nose, then she passes out, and the guy watches the last tape, and then when she finally comes to, she's this totally rancid, crazy, deformed monster, and that's kind of what lends to my theory of this is like a cult thing. That's why these VHS tapes exist, to sort of bestow upon the viewer immortality or something like that. And that kind of brings me into the guy who compiled these tapes. This is the first time we actually see who put these tapes together. It was this guy in the hoodie, and he basically attempts a suicide, but he's still alive. And that makes me wonder, what if he bathed in the same waters as the folks did in 1985? Like, what if he's part of the same cult that I've been theorizing about, and he saw the tapes from 85, and he found the same lake that allowed him to become immortal no matter what kind of damage was done unto him. So, anyways, that's another tangent for another time perhaps, but that's what allows me to believe in that theory. And again, that ambiguity makes you create your own theories and get really excited about these things. But yeah, ultimately the film ends with him killing the male journalist, agent, whoever, gives a big old thumbs up with that busted up face. Then you get more Death Set with 6 different ways to die, I believe it's called. And Yeah, as you could probably detect, like, as soon as I watched the first VHS movie, the Death Set became one of my favorite all-time bands. I just really loved them. Definitely check them out. They got some really good tracks. I believe an Australian experimental punk band is the best way to describe them. But, yeah, Tape 56, I think, for me, it was probably the most satisfying framework. I mean, sorry, Tape 49, I'm getting them both confused. And honestly, I have a really tough time seeing between spot 17 and 16, between Tape 49, and then the framework from 85 being Total Copy. I'm actually very hard pressed to figure out which one should be in which spot. I think they both do their job very well. But for Total Copy, we're in 85 now, so let's talk about the plot here. We have this very campy, very doughy, of course, very gritty and film grainy documentary about this kid or some sort of discovery, or rather it's like a blob that's assimilated the form of a child at first, and he's being studied by a very naive scientist who wants to figure out what the hell he is. He's trying to show this blob or this conglomeration of plasma or something, just these videotapes, newsreels about human culture to sort of teach it. And then at the very end of this tape, or of the movie rather, the being evolves into this crazy leviathan of tentacles that just wipes everyone out, and the only thing that it learned throughout this almost year's worth of study is pretty much like the classic 1980s aerobics tapes, where he gathers all the corpses of the dead crew and then forces them to do the gyrating on the ground, which, and one thing I really love that VHS succeeds at tenfold throughout is sensory overload. Just between the and 1 and 2 and 3 from the videotape that the being is watching, Rory, its name was, whatever. And then you see the dead bodies, and on top of that you see what the bodies are doing, and it's just a perfectly baffling, hilarious, and also scary ending to what is overall a very good movie in my opinion. So yeah, just a really good framework. I don't know if this or Tape 49 being the VHS 2 framework is the best. I really do have a difficult time figuring out which one of the two is my favorite. I mean, maybe now that I'm thinking about it, perhaps Tape 49, just because it better feeds into my theory. So that's where I'm at, but really, it could go either way for me. And now we move on to Suicide Bid from VHS 99. This is spot 15, our last 3-pointer. And this one is a very good one. And I cut this one a lot of slack. My main complaint about this one is I do not like the last 5 seconds of it, really. The end game, where you have all the girls who, like, force this poor kid, like this new college kid, into the coffin underground. They don't know where she went, and then she kind of gangs up with Guillotine, I think her name was, to get all these chicks from the sorority into the coffins, and then you're really on your toes, like, what's gonna happen to these girls? Are they gonna flood? Are they gonna drown? What's gonna happen to them? And then the girl who died, well, quote unquote, she says, I teamed up and she said that we could have all these sorority sisters together, and that's why, or whatever. I'm totally paraphrasing here, but yeah, that definitely ruined it for me. But that's what I said initially. But other than that, the rest of the setup, the middle game, the suspense, that's all there, and it's all very good. But I don't think the ending should be enough for me to discredit everything else that happened before. I think the acting's really solid, the suspense is very well paced. It's a very strong segment. It's just the ending that sinks it for me. But again, that's just me. For others, let me know what you thought about it. I just thought it was a little, again, heavy-handed. It read it out to you. I feel like at that point you're smart enough, like when they're already in the coffins, you're smart enough to know what's going on. But then they kind of just tell you, and then the ambiguity is kind of gone. So that's kind of a shame. I wish that they would have perhaps had let you figure it out instead of just reading it out to you. So for me, that was kind of a missed opportunity on the segments part, but overall, it's a very good watch, and I do always enjoy watching it when it does come up whenever I'm rewatching 99, which happens a lot. I really love 99. Let me take a quick little break, I'm going to resume. Alright, that was probably a very good spot to leave off, because now we are moving on to our 4-pointers. So from here on up, these are the ones I think are very good. I think that on any objective list, you'll see a lot of these up there, and they're just overall a lot of fun. So, in number 14, this is a very recent one, and a lot of people cite this as one of their new favorites, and I totally understand why. I'll explain why it's down here after we talk about it for a little bit. This is from VHS 85, so one of the new installments once again. This is Dream Kill. Now, there's a lot to talk about with this one. So, let's briefly go over the story, which is one of the most complex and multifaceted of all the segments, I think. It basically goes around a series of VHS tapes that are going to a group of detectives, too, really, and they are each showing an act of murder taking place, but they receive the tapes before the murder actually happens, and they figure out who's sending in the tapes, and it happens to be the son of one of the detectives, and it just so happens that one of the detectives happens to be the murderer themselves. And before we learn this, though, of course, we learned that the kid, Gunther, I believe his name was, he has a very special and perhaps familiar ability to dream about murders before they happen. And this is familiar, and I say that in italics because that also appeared in The Black Phone, because this is also produced by the same dudes who made that movie, which is also very awesome. And this segment is also very awesome, very well put together, and I love it a lot. So why is it number 14 and not anywhere higher? I do have a few complaints about it. The first thing is, pretty much what I said with Terror. It's a little too derivative off of something that we've seen before, in this case, very recently. The Black Phone is still very new, and in this case, we get a short, light version of that, which is not a bad thing, especially since it's coming from the exact same creators. But because of that, when I got to this segment, I was hoping that they would change up the mold a little bit more. And that's kind of where my second complaint comes out of it. I felt like it played things a little bit too straight. I didn't feel very surprised about anything. And I think the reason for that is because it's a whodunit mystery, which is always good. I'm always down for a good whodunit mystery, but if you're ever going to tackle that in any format, then you need to expand the pool of who could possibly be doing these murders. Because in this, you really only had 3 genuine characters. You had the 2 detectives and Gunther. So, at that point, especially when Gunther is the son of one of the detectives, you have to assume the murderer is one of them. It's not going to be a good surprise if the murderer just happens to be some random stranger that we've never heard of throughout the rest of the film. That's just not going to track. So, you need to assume it's got to be one of the 3. And you're pretty convinced it's not Gunther. I mean, he's just submitting the tape, and especially if you knew going in that has something to do with Black Phone, that the one that's foreseeing these deaths is probably not going to be the killer. So it has to be one of the detectives. And because we already know that he's related to one of the detectives, then it kind of narrows it down kind of quick, right? So upon rewatching, I just realized it's pretty obvious, and it was pretty obvious first time go around too. So yeah, the predictability and the recycling of an admittedly great concept, which we've already seen before, does bog it down for me. The ones that are above it are a lot more original, which is why I think this one is very difficult to place any higher, but again, it's a totally subjective list, so that's why it's here. But anything I just said does not take away from it. I think it's very good. It's very, very gritty. It's the most VHS of anything in 85, I think. It is insanely grim. There's no respite. There's no time for a break. It is very dark. Feels very Saw in a lot of ways, especially in the aftermath of these murders. And you just see everyone brutalized in the same way. It's just... It's a good slow burn, but that burn kind of fizzles out if you know anything about Black Phone, and because there's such a small pool of people who could have possibly committed these murders and could possibly be the serial killer. So it's very good, it's just too familiar, and that's really the issue for me. Moving on to spot 13, we're still within the 4-point range, and just assume that most of these are going to be 4-pointers. There's only 4 5-pointers, so we'll talk about that when we get there, but still in the 4-point range, we have Aussie'S Dungeon from 99. This is another one that I've come around to a little bit more. My initial critique on this one is that I don't like how it's broken up into 3 different segments. Like, you got the game show, the kids game show, then you got the torture segment, then you got the Aussie revealed segment, I suppose you could call it. But after thinking about it for a while, it's kind of great, just because of how bonkers it is. It's really strange, really out there. Ambiguity, I know I'm using that word a lot. It's not really necessary here. It's just meant to be a really wacky twist on that really cheesy type of kids game show that I think every generation has had some version of in their life. Like Nickelodeon, I think, was the cheesy game show channel in my generation. They had a lot of that. Cartoon Network as well. And in the 80s, they had that in spades for sure. 90s, obviously. So yeah, it took me a while to come around to it, but then I realized it's kind of goofy, kind of stupid, but that's kind of what makes it very pleasant and enjoyable. So, I do still think that the torture segment's a little bit of a slog, not because I find the torture hard to watch. I rarely have an issue with that. It says a lot about me. The torture wasn't even that bad, but yeah, it just took a little long. I think the segment's length is what bogs it down for me, but overall, it's fun to watch, it's enjoyable, and it is very nostalgic. Like, that's definitely something I could never take away from Aussie'S Dungeon. The nostalgia is definitely there, and I think that's what they were aiming for. Now, moving on to number 12, from VHS 1, we have Tuesday the 17th. We have another date title, so this is what I call the glitch one. This is when you have a chick bringing in a whole bunch of friends into the forest. She's kind of talking about how people have died in this forest before, and one by one, through her camera, we see people being killed by this very creepy pasta entity. It's almost this humanoid that's shrouded in this glitch effect that's killing them with tangible materials like traps, snares, knives, and he's possessing their bodies and things like that. And it's just such a cool premise. It felt very creepypasta to me. Or like SCP, like I don't know a whole ton about that sort of subgenre within video game horror, but this one just felt very Gen Z to me in a very good way. It just felt like a very modern horror story. It's like Slender Man meets Blair Witch Project, and I say that in the best way possible. You don't get too attached to the characters, but I don't think you're really supposed to. I mean, it would be great if we got some version of that, or if this was a full-length feature. I mean, we could say that for a lot of these segments that are coming up, but yeah, Tuesday the 17th, I think, has a lot to offer. It ultimately left me feeling satisfied. I loved the monster. I loved how we had, I said this in the last podcast, how we had an anti-final girl, as I like to call her. She's not trying to save anyone. She brought everyone there as a lure to bring out the monster, to execute her ill-fated revenge. I thought that was really fun. Yeah, I just enjoyed this one a lot. Now we move on to another segment from VHS 2. In 11th place, we have A Ride in the Park, one of several zombie-related ones. I think the last one you talked about was Bone Storm. And then I guess Suicide Bid could also be called a zombie one too. I don't know, maybe she was a ghost at that point. That's neither here nor there. But A Ride in the Park is so much campy goodness, and I watched this with my friend, as I already mentioned, and knowing her, she's a huge horror buff, but she is not a fan of zombies at all. But coming out of this, she actually really appreciated this one because it did something very different. It humanized a zombie, and you could never... And that's something I definitely was not expecting going into this one. And on top of that, this entire thing was taken from the point of view of a zombie, from just this average, decent human guy to his bite, and then his transformation into one of the Zeds. And then he and a whole bunch of other zombies ransack a birthday party. And it's just a big pleasure to watch, and it's a really good change on the zombie genre, which a lot of people can understandably write off as being a little bit dry, kind of redundant at this point. But for me, I love a good zombie flick, and I love the change that this one brought in. Like, I recall another movie, Warm Bodies. I've never finished it before, but that's one of the only other times where I could see a film trying to humanize the zombie, which is very rare. It just doesn't happen often, because we usually imagine them being this, well, brainless thing. But this time, it's almost like that human consciousness is still in there, and its first instinct upon realizing this human consciousness is to take its own unlife, which was a really tragic thing to see take place. So it's somber and sad and hard to watch, as it is very hilarious and hokey. So it's just a combination of a lot of interesting elements that make a lot of these segments very great. So yeah, Ride in the Park is a very good one, even though I think it did move a little down compared to the list that we looked at before. I still think it's all around great. I have no issues with this one whatsoever. Now we move on to our top 10. So in the 4-point range, so don't get too excited yet. We have Second Honeymoon from VHS 1. I think this one is seriously underrated. I don't think it's talked about enough. It has no fantastical elements to it. There's no ghosts, there's no aliens, there's no zombies. It's just people. It's just two people going on a second honeymoon, or is it rather two honeymoons taking place at once? That's up to you to figure out. But yeah, and then at the very end, we realize that the person that is stalking this couple has actually been in cahoots with the female this entire time. And then they leave that guy for dead, and then they get into a truck or a car or something, some vehicle, drive away. I don't know, I imagine a truck, just bear with me here. And then the main female lead utters, for me, the immortal line of that segment being, "Did you erase it?" And just the nonchalantness of asking that question just allows me to have that look through that ambiguity and pull out that theory of these two girls were in on it the whole time. Like, it wasn't like one day she met up with a stalker, confronted them, and said, "Hey, why are you intruding on us?" No, she was in on it this entire time. That's what I like to believe, and that's what makes me so interested and invested in this story. And even without that catharsis at the end, even without the climax of the husband's murder, everything that happens before it is so well set up. The pacing and everything. The guy is made out to be a total scumbag. You feel really bad for the female lead. And you're also in equal parts terrified of this stalker that's just walking into their room, dipping the toothbrush into the toilet. It's just so many little nuances in this short, and it's just not talked about enough. And I think it's because it's in one of the better VHS movies where there's so many other segments to talk about. But yeah, just because it doesn't do anything fantastical and it doesn't have any whimsy to it, I don't think that should discredit it whatsoever. I think it really is a fantastic VHS segment. Perfectly gritty, perfectly suspenseful, and just very memorable, at least for me. I think a lot of people forget about it or leave it on the cutting room floor as they're going over their favorites or talking about what the better VHS segments are. But I think objective-wise, Second Honeymoon is one of the best, maybe top 5. I think it really deserves a lot more credit than it gets. Now, here's where I'm going to change the mold up a little bit. We have 9 and 8, because basically we have two segments which are separate, but they're telling the same story, or at least two sides of it. So, in number 9, we have Ambrosia, and in number 8, we have No Wake, both from 85. And these I consider basically one segment in my head. When we go over, like, what is the best VHS movie and do that ranking kind of based on this really weird number system that I have, that's going to change up. But for me, I consider them just part of the same story. That's why I'm lumping them together. The reason why I'm putting them together and not separate is neither of them are nearly as strong without the other. You take one away, the other one kind of falls. That's the best way I could explain it. So, I mean, even though it's number 8, not number 9, let's start with No Wake. So you got a whole bunch of young adults, pretty much, roughly around there. They're going on a camping trip, and they go into Lake Hell, or something like that. Or Lake Evil. That's what it was called. And they hop, so 5 of them venture off in a boat into the lake, as 2 stay behind in a tent. And then they're doing pretty good. Someone's like doing the water skiing in the back of the boat, and she kind of just slumps down. And you're thinking, or at least I was thinking, oh, it's a shark, it's piranhas, it's something like that. But it wound up being something a lot more terrifying. It was a human with a gun. And one by one, everyone starts getting picked off. Like that, so fast, like before you can even like react or kind of rest a little bit, someone else dies. And it's in such quick succession, and it feels so real. And this is honestly one of the few times where, in my first time seeing a VHS movie, I was genuinely terrified. It takes a lot to actually scare me. That shooting segment within No Wake really did freak me out. It was so well orchestrated, so sudden. There was no build-up whatsoever, which is what made it so effective. Because in real life, there's no suspense. There's no suspense in real life. If you're about to get killed, you're not gonna know it's about to happen. It's instantaneous more often than not. Whether you're in a car or you have your back turned to someone, if you're gonna die quick, it's not going to be expected. That's the thing. So that's what made No Wake so scary for me. But then the kicker of this one is that everybody magically comes back to life, quote unquote. And again, they say themselves, we're not really zombies, we're still talking, we're still conscious, we have our brains blown out of our heads, but we're still having full-fledged conversations, which is pretty friggin' wild. And then they say that we gotta get revenge on whoever did this to us, and it kind of just ends there. And then that's why I say, if it weren't for Ambrosia, or however you pronounce that word, I'm still not totally sure what that means in relation to the segment. If it weren't for Ambrosia, No Wake wouldn't be nearly as high as it is on this list. If it just ended there, I would have been sorely disappointed, because I love everything about it. But it was hopeful enough that they would continue the story to some capacity, and they did with Ambrosia. So this focuses in on almost this quinceañera, almost this coming-of-age celebration, birthday party sort of thing. You have Ruth. I don't know why I love Ruth so much. I think she is such a good, scary, uncompromisingly evil character who you just want to learn so much more about. Like, I want to see a full backstory on this young woman, like almost like what they did with Orphan, where you had Orphan first kill and you learned about their upbringing, where they came from, what happened to them in the past. I want to know about Ruth. I want to know about her childhood, how she was quote-unquote brainwashed to think as she does. Like, I don't think she's even brainwashed. I just think that she's bad to the bone to begin with. But why she's part of this family, where I just call it the 7 cult, where basically they say that every single member of that family, or the friends who might be there, are part of this group where they have this ritual to kill exactly 7 people, no more, no less. And it's revealed to us that her coming of age is, her initiation is by killing 7 people who happen to be the campers who we saw in No Wake earlier on in 85. And that was, no pun intended, absolutely mind-blowing. I think that was absolutely great. And the thing that makes these two segments fantastic is a literal Chekhov's gun. Now, I need to backtrack a little bit. If you don't know what a Chekhov's gun is, me being an English minor, I gotta rant a little bit. A Chekhov's gun is basically as follows. If you see a gun in a story, that effectively means that gun is going to be used, or it needs to be used. It's essential foreshadowing. Here, though, you have a literal Chekhov's gun. It doesn't always need to be a gun or a firearm, but in this case, it's a water gun. In No Wake, we see the kids, not really kids again, young adults, are kind of just fiddling around with a water gun, teasing each other and whatever. And then in Ambrosia, you see a young kid, part of the Seven cult, squirt Ruth with the water gun. And I didn't even catch that detail on my first viewing. My friend caught that detail. And if I didn't notice that, I would not love these two segments as much as I do. Because as it turns out, the crew from No Wake got revenge by tracing the license plate of the car to the Seven cult so they could have their shooter squirted with the immortality water from the lake. And that is revealed again later on in like a very brief 5-second segment after Ruth tries taking her own life, doesn't work out, and she's hauled away. But we do actually see an earlier moment where the No Wake people are filling the water gun with water from the lake, and that is why she would not die. She's taken away, and we never see her again. I personally am hoping we do see her again in some capacity, because I think she's such an enticing character. She felt very Get Out, I suppose I could say. I'm not a Get Out kind of guy, but, you know, almost like this classist sort of air to what's going on. And again, it's not like heavy-handed at all. You know, it's a classist thing, a classist motive, or at least it's what you're predicting. But you don't totally know why this Seven cult exists. They're just killing 7 people as part of their initiation. And I definitely want to know more about that. I mean, it's kind of per VHS tradition where everyone kind of just goes back to the couch. Like a sitcom kind of, like nothing else happened before matters. But I would love to know a lot more about the Seven cult and Ruth. I just think it was such an interesting story. And yeah, just these two segments together make for one great, cohesive tapestry that really did just make me love 85 all the more. And for me, it was the highlight, these two segments together. Let me get some water once again. Good stuff, good stuff. Moving on, number 7. We have an entry from 94. This is The Subject, which was a little higher before, but that's totally okay. This is really a crunch point for me. The segments from here on up, it's very difficult to say exactly where they should be placed, so take it with a grain of salt. The Subject's great. Everything about it is really awesome. You know what, I'm going to change my rhythm a little bit, because in number 6 we have Safe Haven. Both of these segments are very similar to me. Obviously with The Subject we have the crazy cybernetic one, where you have a young woman who's abducted by a crazy Mad Hatter scientist who's trying to merge man and machine, and she's trying to survive. She escapes in this very video game-like way, gets a firearm and everything mounted to her stub, pretty much, and lays waste to the intruding SWAT team, drop team, whatever. And then in Safe Haven, which I'd argue is probably one of the best VHS segments ever made, and a lot of people highlight this as their favorite, you have the almost Jonestown cult. I think it's like Polynesian, South Korean, I'm not totally sure, I apologize for that. But then, like, you know Safe Haven, and I've explained Safe Haven before, totally crazy. I love both of these segments a lot. I think the reason why they're brought down ever so slightly for me is because they do so much to the point where I feel like it kind of loses the focus. Like, they do so many things, they get so creative, and well-meaningly so, that it's hard to find a linear plane to follow. Like, there's so many tangents, there's so many like little Easter eggs, little bits of lore, just little side events happening, like away from the main plot at hand, that for me, I kind of just get lost. It's hard to focus on the main butter that's going on in this, so that's kind of where it is for me. Like, alright, I guess I should explain a few examples for each. Like, for the subject, obviously all of it's great, but then it gets a total shift where it gets very video gamey, which, again, is really fun. There's not a bad moment in the subject, but it kind of takes away from the very mute and toned down and somber tone from the initial half, but then it gets very action-oriented all of a sudden. It gets very rushed, it's very fast, then you see a head in a jar, you have this other poor woman laid out on the table that she's forced to sacrifice, and it's all great elements, but it would all be better if it was stretched out over a longer amount of time, if it had its own feature film. As for Safe Haven, meanwhile, it's a very big cult. There's a lot to explore. It's very Jonestown. It's very Heaven's Gate. There's a lot of different types of people. There's a lot of roles being played out. Everyone's doing something very different. Like, you got the kids with the Kool-Aid, pretty much. You have them doing their drawings. You have the woman with that one more present kid throughout the segment. Yeah, and then you got, of course, the main cult leader. I don't know if we ever got wind of his name or not, but, like, there should have been a lot more focus on him, but that kind of drifts away to the pregnancy. Then you got the big old hell demon that pops out of the woman's stomach and all that. So I just think it tried accomplishing too much, and it was successful, don't get me wrong, but for me as a viewer, both the subject and Safe Haven alike, I love them both a lot. It's just, I feel like there was a little too much going on, to the point where the main focus kind of got a little bit muddied up, but not enough for me to bring it any lower. I think they're still both superior examples of what a VHS segment should be, so not taking away anything. They're both amazing. I love them. Hope you do too. Now we move on to our top 5. This is our last 4-point entry, being Storm Drain from 94. Now, I would argue, as I'm sure a lot of others would argue, this is the segment that redeemed the VHS franchise. After Viral, I think that's when a lot of people kind of dropped off and figured, oh, that's it for this franchise, just another forgotten trilogy. Had its moments, then it kind of slumped towards the end, but then I think as soon as people started saying, Hail Rotma, Hail Rotma, that was our sign that VHS was alive and breathing and friggin' back from the dead. Oh man, and now we got 3 more Shudder movies to add to the franchise. So if it weren't for Storm Drain, I don't think this franchise would have been any further along than it already is. But yeah, there's not a whole lot I need to talk about Storm Drain with content-wise. I mean, it feels very Blair Witch, which is great. Also feels very creepypasta, kind of similar to, was it Tuesday the 17th? Is that what it was called? Tuesday the 17th, yeah. Where you got this cryptid type of monster in this urbanized environment with a little bit of forest going on. But of course, this time we're in a sewer, very gritty. I'm using that word gritty a lot, but I mean, that's kind of the word for this franchise, right? And then you get the plot twist at the end where she's kind of brainwashed or manipulated to fall into the Rotma cult, or whatever you want to call it. A lot of ambiguity, but that's all made up for with shock value. And I think it did that very well tenfold. Storm Drain is great. It's one of the all-time greats, and it's one of the biggest milestones in the entire franchise. Without Storm Drain, again, there's so many other segments and movies that we just would not have. I'm very happy that we have the Ratman, or Ratma, to recall. It's the time that the franchise got new life, so I'm very happy that we have 94. And we'll be talking about 94 later, don't you worry about that. So, let me take a breath. Let me take some water as we move on to our top 4, which are our 4 5-point segments. One moment. In our 4th place, we have From 99 to Hell and Back. This one is the most fun of all the segments. And you know what? That's totally okay. It's not very scary at all. It's totally goofy, goes for camp, it knows exactly what it wants to be, but that's what makes it such a pleasant watch. It's just really exciting, and I love this is also the end of the movie as well, and it ends with the track Long Way Back from Hell. I don't recall the artist of it, but those two together create for a very good bookend for 99. I just love how they complement each other, and the story itself is just a hell of a lot of fun, pun intended, why not? Got the two college buddies pretty much. They literally go to hell, and they meet Mabel, who's a total tour de force character, one of my favorite characters in the whole franchise. Definitely a character actor, you can tell she is into it. It's just so much fun. And then when they're actually in hell, there's so much to look at, nothing that takes away from the main plot at hand, which is to get out of hell and back, hence the title. You got all the creepy little monsters, you got the tiny pitchforks, the little baby-sized bear traps for the hands. It's just a good time. It's so much fun. I watched with my friend, and I think this is the segment that totally sold the franchise for her. This is what made her fall back in love with the found footage format. So I'm really glad that she loved VHS after watching Tell and Back. I'm very happy that I chose 99 as her first. So yeah, it's just great segment. It's just a lot of laughs, a lot of fun, and it's not bad that it's not scary. I think that's totally fine. But something that is very scary and very suspenseful on the opposite side of the coin is our third spot. We're in our top 3 now. We have The Empty Wake from 94. Every time I watch this one, I love it just a little bit more. Again, I think similarly to Second Honeymoon, it's a little underplayed. I don't feel like people talk about this one enough. This one screams to me George A. Romero zombies. It's subtle. It's not very loud. You have the slow shambling zombies. Well, it's one zombie really, and then eventually two. But just the pacing, the suspense, the quiet, the little noises that happen. Then suddenly you get the thunderstorm. Then you get that guy who kind of just walks in, does a little something with his hands, we don't know what, before the coffin, and then he sees himself out. And just all of this makes for this really drab atmosphere. So when the coffin starts bumping around, and then the body falls out, it starts chasing the lady in this very claustrophobic environment, and there's nobody else there. It genuinely is a scary place to be for this character and for us. And you too feel very alone in this whole situation, and it's so good. I really love this segment a lot. And that's why I say, less is more. We talked about the subjects in Safe Haven. They both do a lot, but for me, Empty Wake does a better job than both of those, because it knows how to keep itself small, how to focus, and it still scares you just as much, I think, personally. And it dips into the fantastical just a little bit with the zombies and all that. And you feel bad for this main woman who's trapped in this morgue, pretty much. And then she doesn't make it out alive. She stumbles out, fumbles away from the camera, jumps out the window, and the segment ends there. That's all you need. And it's just such a good story. It plays out like a mystery novel. I could see it being on a page, maybe. It's just such a good watch. One of the most rewatchable, I think. There's so many little elements, not too many elements, though, to pick up on, to enhance the experience. If you haven't thought about this one in a while, definitely rewatch 94 and pay attention to Empty Wake. There's so many little nuances, little nooks and crannies of the direction that make it so good. Do not discredit this one. It's always worth a watch. Now we move on to our second place. Now this is totally biased, alright? I know a lot of people put this at the bottom of their list, but I love this one so much. From 1999, we have Shredding. This is the punk rock one that the film opens on, aside from the framework. You have Rack, then they hear about this band called Bitch Cat. They go to this underground facility to see where they died, and then they ultimately wind up being murdered, and then their carcasses are possessed by the Bitch Cat group. I go on a whole rant on this in that initial podcast, so if you want to check that out, please go there. I won't go there today for the sake of time, but I think another thing that I do want to add on to this is I was trying to figure out why is it that I love this so much. And then shortly after watching 99, I watched Return of the Living Dead, which also had a zombie film with a punk rock backdrop. And I don't know, I guess this is something that works for me. You almost have this anarchistic vibe merging with zombies. Like, I don't know why it is that formula works so well, but for me that just gets me very excited. But at the same time, it's equal parts very terrifying. And as I said in the last podcast, this is one of the only segments in the franchise that genuinely terrified me. It gave us a fate worse than death, which I think is very good. You have these carcasses, you don't know if they're consciously still in there or not, but they're forced to dance till they're dead. Dance till they're dead, yeah style, pretty much. And that was really frightening, a really frightening visual to me. Again, more sensory overload. I just thought it was really good. I really love this segment. I'm surprised not a lot of people love it as much as I do. I think it's definitely one of those love-hated segments. And I hope a lot of other people love it as much as I do. And also that track, Diamonds Turn Black, is a total banger. Definitely listen to it at full if you haven't yet. It's on YouTube, very easy to find. I love Shredding a lot, I really do. However, I had to go through this entire list because I had to relook at the segments I watched before, and of course include 85. But ultimately, when I think of VHS, what is the very first segment that comes to mind? It's the very first segment that we ever watched. At our number one spot, from VHS 1, we have Amateur Night. This is VHS. This defines the entire franchise. Without Amateur Night, you have nothing. This one literally swept me off my feet. Going into VHS, I just figured, oh, alright, fine. There's just going to be another jab at the slowly dying found footage genre. It's not going to be anything that special. Whatever, you got guys going to a bar, I just don't care. Not a big deal. Doesn't matter. Then you have the tour de force being Lily, the siren. Of course, she got her own spin-off movie. I've only seen it once, so I couldn't speak to it a whole lot. I think I liked it. I don't really recall. But then you get that reveal when she roars into the camera, and then she gets the wings and everything. You see that wing on the side of the camera, and she's carrying the guy up in the air. And then I'm like, this is something else. This franchise is trying to do something totally different that no other found footage franchise is trying to do. And it's merging social commentary with the fantastical in a way that it's not beating you over the head with it, which is something I really hate. I really hate social horror or political horror, where it tries feeding you a social agenda. I really despise that. But this short did such a good job at pulling in a very harsh topic, being date rape. I mean, that's pretty much what the segment's about. And then the consequence for these guys is coming in close quarters with the siren, with Lily, and then she slaughters most of them, and then she flies one of them away into the stars, never to be seen again. And yeah, whenever I hear the words VHS, I think of the siren, that face, I like you, that phrase she kept saying, that mantra. And this is just the first thing that comes to mind. Not Shredding, not Empty Wake, not either of the two I mentioned before being, that's right, The Subject or Safe Haven. It's always Amateur Night. That's always the one that my brain goes to first. It's just so good. It's perfectly gritty. I think up to a certain point, it was the goriest of the franchise, and then I think the goriest now might be Dreamkill. It's one of those two, but Amateur Night is definitely one of the most nasty and uncensored ones of the entire series. And the whole thing is so good. Very scary, very grounded in reality despite the fantastical. It takes me off my feet. I said that already, but it's quite literal. I mean, with the wings and everything. And really, I was watching VHS during a very difficult time in my life. I was a young adult, fresh out of college, not totally sure what I was supposed to be doing with myself. Still not, 2 years after the fact, but this is what made VHS my therapy franchise. Like, every horror buff has their own therapy movie, their own therapy character or franchise that they fall back on, and for me, VHS was that. And then VHS 85 came out, and that was the first time I got to see a VHS movie debut, and that was such a big deal for me. But of all the great memories that I have from this franchise, from how much it's helped me, in spite of how it's introduced me to one of my favorite bands being the Death Set, holy crap, Amateur Night, I gotta give all the credit to that. Not just because simply it's the first, therefore it's the best. It's not why it's getting all this credit. It's because it defined everything. Without Amateur Night, none of the other ones quite stand on their own because they are informed by this first segment. Like, you have some that could be stretched out into their own movies, like Safe Haven for sure could be its own movie. The Empty Wake, I feel like, could to some capacity. But Amateur Night is what introduced that grittiness, was able to successfully make that merge between social commentary, horror, terror, and the supernatural and cryptids, do all that at once without doing too much. And I just think that its ability to find that middle ground is what really took it to the top. Just such a great segment, and I really hope people don't discredit it in light of all the new ones that are out now these days, because it really just is fantastic. So, I think I've said my praises enough. Let me take a pause and set up my monitor now as we go ahead and use those points in order to try and rank the movies, which is no easy task. So, give me a moment here. Alright, so for those of you who have been listening along and not watching, now might be the time to flip your phone on, because we are going to be having some visuals to look at as we go through the numbers. So as we go ahead and do that, I'm going to explain how exactly I rank these movies. This is just experimental. It's not to say what is the best VHS movie. It's not even to necessarily say what my favorite VHS movie is. It's really just to see how this point system adds up, just for kicks and giggles. So basically what I did is I attributed each and every short and framework with a point value, as we've already talked about. Then essentially what I did is I added those point values together to give the total score for the film, but I went a step further and I actually averaged them out. So what I did is I took that total score and divided it by the amount of segments and frameworks that were in that movie in order to get an average score, which kind of ranged between 1 and 5. So pretty much an average score would be the score for the film itself and the average score for each individual segment that would be coming around. So anyhow, let's begin. And obviously in 6th and last place, at least for me, and I think for just about everybody, we have VHS Viral, which I really just don't like this movie, and I hate rewatching it too. Like, I'll rewatch it on a whim, like to see if maybe there's some reevaluating I want to do, but I've watched it 3 times. I think after that, my decisions can be pretty safely concrete. So, pretty much Vicious Circles, that's our framework. Each one of these is going to start with the framework for the record. Vicious Circles, that gets a 1, pretty easy. I mean, it's nonsensical, has no meaning to it, doesn't relate to any of the segments at all, doesn't teach us anything about the VHS lore, which I'm pretty sure exists. Dante the Great gets a 2, not the worst thing ever, it's just it doesn't feel very VHS-y, if you know what I mean, too documentary style, and just the overall direction just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Parallel Monster also gets a 2, a little too heavy-handed, you know me, don't love that as much. Bone Storm, easy one. I hate the direction, hate the camera movement. It's just impossible to watch for me. So the total score was 6 points, and we had an average of 1.5. Very unfortunate. Next up, and now, this is where, again, this is why the point system is experimental. It's not accurate to an objective or subjective standpoint. Here, I think it's totally wrong. I mean, you gotta keep in mind that all these movies have different amounts of shorts, therefore they're gonna have different point values and things like that, so, in 5th place, we have VHS 2, which I think is wrong. It should definitely be higher, but again, just to play around with the points and see where everything lines up, let's go through it. Framework, Tape 49, I gave it a 3. I kind of love how it ties into my crackpot theory about how everything ties together. However, one of the things I really dislike about this movie is Phase 1 clinical trials. That gets a point score of 1. A very good setup, but the ending and the middle act are just not good. And I really hate saying that. I just had a lot of hope for this franchise. Where am I going? For this short. And it just didn't live up to the standard that I was hoping it would reach. And I really was disappointed upon rewatching it that, yeah, it just isn't that great. So I really hate saying that, but I just don't like clinical trials. It doesn't work for me. Then we have A Ride in the Park with 4 points. Here's where things definitely hike up a lot. Very fun zombie story, humanizes the undead in a very unexpected way, in a franchise where you wouldn't expect it to go that far and that deep and that profound. So that was really cool. Safe Haven, definitely one of the old-timers. I gave it a 4. I only notched it down because I think there's too much going on. Others might be okay with that, but for me, I preferred to notch it down just a little bit so I could be a little bit more focused, but still great all the way through. Nothing wrong with it. Just not all the way at the top for me, which is okay. Then we have Slumber Party Alien Abduction. I've abbreviated it a bit. That gets 2 points. Just, again, a little too fast, kind of like Bone Storm, but I say it's better just on the fact that I like the story a little bit more, and I do care about the 3 main characters being the sister, the brother, and Tank, the dog. Don't kill a dog in front of me, man. My headcanon is that the dog fell a very far distance, cried a little bit, took a nap, woke up, all the humans are gone, it gets all the treats in the world, because there's nobody left, so it can eat as much as it wants. And then it could frolic happily in the fields, and everything's okay. VHS 2 got a total score of 14 points with an average of 2.8. And again, if I were to rank this objectively or subjectively, it would definitely be higher, so I don't think that's fair, but from here on out, I think it's pretty consistent. So that takes us to VHS 85, and I pretty much suspected that this would be a middling entry, which is totally okay. We have Total Copy, that gets a 3. Again, the frameworks for me are kind of weak overall, but I think the reason why I like this one a lot is because it had that really crazy, insane ending. Again, kind of that sensory overload, I like that a lot. Then we have No Wake and Ambrosia. Cumulatively, that's an 8. That's 4 points each. They tell the same story, just from different sides, and I think that was brilliant. I love them both, but again, neither of these would survive on their own without the other. If I were to rank these individually, No Wake, I think would get a 3, because it didn't have a discernible ending, and Ambrosia, I guess I'd give that probably a 2, because it seriously relies on No Wake happening first in order for Ambrosia to have any semblance of meaning. So yeah, without either of the two, the others wouldn't function. That's pretty much the best way to describe it. God of Death, it's kind of a here nor there. That's like a high 2. Like, it should be a 3. It just doesn't quite get there for me, because the Earthquake stuff is great, but then when it gets to the God of Death stuff, the Mayan underground tomes and all of that, it just took me out of the immersion. That's really what brings something down for me, is if it loses immersion, that's where I kind of get lost, and I just don't prefer when I'm watching quite as much. Then that takes us to Techno God. That's an easy 2. I give it a little bit of props because I do think the final death is actually very good. If it's even a death, she might still be alive under there somehow, but I thought that visual was very harrowing and scary, so I like that a lot. But beyond that, I didn't really care about any other elements of that short at all. So the total of points is 15 with an average of 3. Now things get a little bit interesting with 94 and 99 because we actually have a tie. But preference-wise, I think this lines up well. I think my third place would be 94, then my second place would be 99. Although 99 could be interchangeable with the first place, but I think an easy third place would be 94. I don't think that's out of place at all. I think it's where it belongs. Even though, again, this is the most divisive for me because I love the first half, don't care much about the second half. Holy hell, the framework is very weak, that's why I gave it a 2. At least it's kinetic, and it does somehow join all the videos together. Storm Drain's great, gave that 4 points. I'm going to go through the rest of these pretty quickly. Empty Wake, easy 5 points, very George A. Romero, love it a lot. Please rewatch it if you haven't given this one a second thought yet. The Subject, 4, a loud and proud, really crazy one, and I love it a lot, but just a little bit too much, but it's still great. Still a very good segment. Terror gets a 1. It just annoys me a lot, especially with those blaring sirens. I do not appreciate that much, and it's too thing-like. I wish it would do its own thing, do something to revitalize that a little bit. So that gets a total score of 16 with an average of 3.2. And hold on a minute. Oh, holy shit, I just realized I missed something in 85. I missed Dreamkill, didn't I? Yeah, Dreamkill got... Oh no. Is my math off? Hold on, let me back out for a minute. So Dreamkill got 4 points. I am so sorry. I thought I had everything right down, but I did not. So, let's see. Dreamkill. Let me go ahead and plug that back in. I am very sorry about this. So, Dreamkill was a very good one. Again, it was a little bit derivative, but I thought it was fine. So, that got 4 points. Let me go ahead and type that in so that way you'll all see that in post. So, Dreamkill got a 4. Let's go ahead and pull out the calculator. Sorry about the sidebar. It's a live stream here, more or less, so things are gonna be a little bit broken. But anyways, that bumps up the total from 15 to 19. So let's go ahead and fix that. And then that takes us to... So we got a total of 19. So 19 divided by... We have 1, 2, 3, 4... 5, 6 total segments, and that would equal 3.2. Alright, so that doesn't really change anything, so that's fine. But yeah, Dreamkill gets a 4, and then that leads to a total of 19 with an average of 3.2. And oh, we have a 3-way tie? Are you kidding me? That is weird. Okay, yeah, the point system is jack shit. It doesn't mean anything. We're just doing this for fun. Yeah, then we'll just do some fun little short rankings at the end of this numbers by numbers ranking. But anyways, back on track. 99, that's my second place as per the point system. The Gawkers, included with the framework, I just say that's all one segment. I wouldn't call that 2 by any capacity. That gets 2 points. Shredding gets a 5, just solely on personal preference. Suicide Bid gets a 3. Again, I cut that one a lot of slack. I think everything leading up to the ending is very good. Aussie'S Dungeon gets a 4. It is a lot of fun. It's very kooky and weird, so I gotta give it that. To Hell and Back gets a 5. No shame in that. I think that is an excellent segment. It deserves that 5. It's a lot of fun. Total is 19 with an average of 3.2. However, I think the best VHS movie, objectively, is the very first one. So we have Tape 56, a framework, having a 3, Amateur Night with 5, Second Honeymoon with 4, Tuesday the 17th with 4, The Sick Thing That Happened to Emily When She Was Younger, again, paraphrasing here, cutting it down rather, gets a 3. Then we have Halloween 10/31/98 with a 3. Total of 22 points because I think this is the longest VHS movie. with an average of 3.7. So if I were to choose which is my subjective favorite movie of all of these, I'd say it would be VHS 99, just because it's the one that I revisit the most. I think it's the most rewatchable. It has most of my favorites in there. I think I find myself rewatching 99 and 94 the most, because they have most of my favorites in there. As well as VHS. Like, those are probably my top 3 favorites if you take the points aside. So, subjectively, I think this point system did succeed. As I figured, 85 kind of in the middle, totally okay. But from an objective standpoint, I think VHS 2 should definitely be in second or first place. I don't know why it's this far down. I think it's just because it has less segments than the other ones. I really don't know, but that's kind of just how the math played out. I know it's a little weird. I'm sorry if I disappointed anyone because of that, but one thing I know for certain, for no matter how you twist it, VHS Viral will forever be at the bottom, unless they somehow find a way to make a worse VHS movie, but I don't think it's possible. So, yeah, that concludes this ranking. I think that's about it. I guess if I were to go through each movie in chronological order and just pick my favorite segment, in VHS 1, definitely Amateur Night. VHS 2, I'd say that would have to go to Safe Haven. Then we have Viral. I'd say the end credits, because I think the end credits are very good with the music. Then as for 94, gotta go to Empty Wake. Then in 99, it's easily Shredding. And then in 85, again, it's kind of a package deal with No Wake and Ambrosia. So those are my favorites, my favorite segments, I think, within each movie, pretty much. I think that's totally good. And my phone's going off the fritz, I don't know why, so I'm going to wrap up here. I hope you guys enjoyed this little podcast. I hope you were doing something fun or productive as you were listening along. I haven't done a whole lot of horror rankings. They've more been to Star Wars more than anything, but if you want to check out the previous ranking that I did, to sort of compare a little bit, please feel free to do so. It's there at your leisure. And this is an action figure review channel. I just do these podcasts as an off tangent just for fun. So if you want to check out any of those reviews, then please go ahead and give them a shot. Why not, right? So that's pretty much all. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, then please like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, do all that crap. There's also a Patreon in the description below. If you want to support the channel in any way. If not, that's okay. If you're here just for the fun, the shits and giggles, totally okay. Totally get it. But yeah, that's about all. So hope you enjoyed. Rock on, and I will see you all later.